What's going on, traders? Happy Monday. I hope you guys all had an amazing weekend, but I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know exactly how it went for me day trading wise, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. And as you guys can see, my overall account was green on the day, right? Slightly green. But in terms of how I did day trading wise, today I actually had a pretty decent red day, right? So I was down $115 on SQs and I did lose an additional $30 on TQs, right? So down nearly 1.5% on the day. And so, as you guys can see, I even had slightly more filled orders than I typically do, right? So, definitely over traded today, and there were a lot of lessons to be learned. So, let's go ahead and break down exactly what ended up happening with me, right? So, as far as what I actually ended up, um, uh, um, as far as what my game plan was, right, heading into the market, what I was paying attention to was whether or not the market was overbought or oversold, right? And as you guys can tell, the past, even just 20 days, you guys can see we've been soaring a lot lately and we have been approaching general levels where there have been resistances, right? So that's something I was paying attention to. So I definitely saw more value in SQQQ today. And so that's why as soon as market opened, that's what I started to focus on, right? So market opened at 6:30, we actually started to shoot up, right? And I decided to get into SQQQ with the light position size because we were testing previous resistance levels, right? And I thought there was definitely a chance we can, get rejected and correct ourselves at least back to where we bounced during the pre-market session around these levels, right? Towards the bottom VWAP. And so that's why, this thing pushed up. I got into SQQQ, but it continued to make new highs here, right? And so because of that, I actually decided to cut my trade on SQQQ, right? And didn't want to get in aggressively until I saw true confirmation it was selling off. And so once this thing started to peak out and actually start to sell off here, I got back into SQQQ, right? This thing broke below the EMA. I averaged up. It was going well, right? Everything was going well. And I did cut majority of shares around here, but this thing actually ended up changing direction, right, and breaking back above the EMA. And so after this ended up happening, it definitely made me a little uneasy in terms of, whether or not we were actually going to continue to sell off. And I did give back profit on the way up here. But we eventually did start to sell off again, but we did find a support yet again, started to push back up, right? And I continue to dig myself in a hole on SQQQ, right? Because I gave back all the profit I made on this trade because I continue to ride with shares up, right? And as this thing started to continue to push up, right, that's where I finally decided to cut my losses on SQQQ, right? And so I was giving the market after that happened time to decide what it was going to do. And right around here, it ended up pulling on back, right, trying to make a new high here. And then it did pull on back here. And then on this pullback, I actually decided to get into TQQQ again because I thought we were going to continue to rally all day as we have been seeing, right? Even the past 20 days, we've been seeing multiple days where once we were rallying, right, we continue to rally all day. And so given this thing was continuing to show signs of an uptrend, right, I wanted to continue with that pattern and not fight it. So I got back into TQQQ here. This thing ended up pushing up. I averaged up and then this thing actually peaked out a bit, but then ended up pulling on back, forming these lower highs, lower lows. I had to cut my loss there on that trade, right? And so that's really where I ended up getting burned. So unfortunately, SQQQ ended up pushing up, right? Or the NASDAQ ended up selling off towards the later half of the day. And my initial plan that I wanted to do, right, focusing on SQQQ, it did end up playing out, but it did take some time for it to really peak out before it started to actually sell off, right? And so I put myself in that position, right, to not be able to profit on this pullback here, right? I dug myself in too big of a hole once this thing started to continue to uptrend. I was just really fighting direction, right, and trying to be hopeful and think this thing was gonna actually sell off here when in reality it didn't have to, right? As you guys can see, it started to climb some more before it actually sold off, right? And so there was a lesson to be learned there, which was, rather than, or once, a trade can start going according to plan like it was here, right? But that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to play out, right? It was going according to plan, but this thing started to change direction, right? Clearly. It broke above the EMA very strongly, and once it pulled on back, it didn't form a new low, right? It actually started to pick back up above the EMA, and form a new high. And so I was fighting direction, right, being hopeful that this thing was going to sell off when there was clear, right, there was definitely clear indications that this thing was not going to end up pushing down, or at least it was struggling to push down, right? Because every time we would push down and break below the EMA, we would end up breaking back above it. And so those are clear indications that this thing is struggling to sell off. And once it did start to push up, right, I was just digging myself in a big hole, fighting direction. And so, in the future, heading into the rest of the week, if a trade going my way, that's great and all, but I have to be real with myself that, this thing can end up changing direction, and I need to respect that, right, rather than fight it. And so there was definitely plenty of money to be made on the way down. If you, timed it perfectly, in a ideal scenario, that could have offered a 3% margin on SQQQ. So congrats to anyone who was able, to take advantage of that, right? Because on the bigger time frames, right, and in hindsight, it's clear to see that this thing was overbought, and it was definitely due for a bit of a price correction, at least back down to where I previously stated, right, where it was bouncing at during the pre-market session. And so I'm excited to follow up with it tomorrow and see what happens, but that's pretty much how my day went. I hope yours day ended up going a lot better, right? But if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop a comment and I will be more than happy to answer that myself. But that's pretty much everything. I will be trading tomorrow, posting a recap tomorrow, so I hope to see you guys then. Take care and have a good rest of your day.